how did I end up in Ireland? Okay, this is a this is a story. The trainer, I used to live in a little village called West Horsley in Surrey, and the trainer, he was moving all his horses to a racing establishment in Lambourne in Berkshire, and he said to me, "If you want, you can have a job up there." And I hadn't done my exams, and I said, "If he goes, that's it. I'll be finished." So I came home, told my mum, she was on her own, and I said, "Ma, I'm getting a job. I'm getting a job in Lambourne. So forget about, can you tell the school that I won't be coming back?" So I went to Lambourne, and I loved it. It was a racing establishment. There were about 40 racing stables in Lambourne. And even the side of the road had non-slip tarmac for the horses to trot along to the gallops. There was gallop, it was really it was a racing establishment. Yeah. But unfortunately, the man that I worked for, he was a bit of a, what would you call him, a venture capitalist or something like that. And he lost all his money. And he decided he'd move his yard, obviously to avoid paying taxes or this, that and the other. He decided to come to Ireland. So more or less I had to go back home to my own house. And I thought, this is terrible, So the horses were moved from Lambourne to Ireland, and I got a job in another little stable in the same village where my brother worked. And I said, that's it was a flat racing stable, and I was too heavy for that because I'm, nearly 6 foot. So I presumed my racing or riding career was it. But after about 3 or 4 months, I got a phone call from Ireland. Would you like a job in Ireland? So I'll be on the next plane. So they sent me tickets to Dublin Airport, and I was there. And where we went to was a place in Clondalkin. It was Cappamore House, and the Cappamore House is where Archbishop Dermot Ryan was born. And it meant nothing to me at the time. I was only 17. So, but once again, his what would you call them, investments that he would make, how he made his money, didn't work out. So I was there for a few months, and the person who was more or less managing the stables for this, his name was Crossley Cook. He decided that he would go into training for himself, and Crossley Cook went back to England, and so we got Brackenstown House stables, and that's how we ended up in Swords. So I found the Irish to be so friendly, even though there's a bit of an edge between, he's English, but I think it was because I was kind of harmless enough that they kind of said, this poor idiot, we'll let him off. So, but yeah, so I was working in the yard and in Brackenstown stables. And what a place! It was like a playground. It was every day you rode the horses around the fields, the woods, in the river, and you went by the lake. And the horses actually loved being trained in around that area because compared to Lambourne, which was the racing establishment, all there was open fields. And some of them they'd get it into their head that I don't like this. Whereas in Brackenstown, I've never saw one horse that didn't enjoy going out in around the woods, splashing in the river, and it was fun. Well, really, it would be after I had left Brackenstown, which now there was a stallion in Clochran Stud called Blandford, but he's no relation to the horse. Yeah, no, David Blandford. He would have been the horsebox driver in England in Lambourne, and he would have driven the horses to the races, or off to wherever they were needed to go. And he was the man that came with Crossley Cook from Lambourne to Ireland at first. And of course, when he went bang in Ireland, what happened was there were about half a dozen horses in the yard that Crossley Cook owed money to. The owners, the owner of the chemist shop, he would have veterinary bills there for buying stuff. The butcher shop, he didn't pay him. There was a garage, and all these people that were owed money. Blandford said to them, "I'll tell you what I can do," he says. "We have a few horses here." He says, "I can train them for you, and we see how we go." Yeah. So that was how he got half a dozen owners that were owed money by Crossley Cook. So I met my wife. There was a young. We often had people coming into work as grooms in the yard. I mean, they come and they go. They find maybe a better job, kind of a better paying job maybe, because working with horses really didn't pay that well unless you were in the kind of. I rode a few horses and you got paid well for that. The what would you call the Irish Racehorse Association? They managed all the owners and they collected all the fees for them, and you got paid. One of these guys working in the yard, he lived next door to where my wife lived, and it was in Clontarf, which was not too far away from. And I brought him home one day. Who should be there? Only the bold Rita. And I said, "Ooh." So got chatting to her, and I was racing the next day, and I said to her, "Do you want to come to the races with me?" And "Oh, okay, yeah." Yeah. So it kind of developed from there, and she used to catch the bus from town out to Brackenstown, the 60 bus. It was the Lees Cross bus. It used to stop right outside the stable, the Brackenstown gate, and I'd meet her up at the top of the avenue. I did have a car, but, well, you call it a car, it was a Morris Minor. I didn't realise when I moved into Brackenstown House that the history that was behind it. To me, it was just a playground. I was 17-year-old lunatic. But when you go back to, there was a Viscount Molesworth owned the estate, and he developed all the gardens, the lakes, and I mean the vista from the house. It must have been fantastic, because he built an artificial lake on top, which extends from Brookdale. The actual hollow is still in the ground up beside Brookdale, where there was an artificial lake, and they called it a canal. Yes, that's right. There was trees all the way around it, and when I think back to it now, we had a couple of fences around the edge of that canal, and we used to school the horses over the jumps, and half of the canal probably had water in it. The part nearer the house, obviously the leaks had developed and the water had leaked out of it. But down the furthest end, the furthest east from Brackenstown House, there was water in it, and it kept the horses from. It kept them straight. But yeah, there was a one. As I say, Molesworth. He developed all of this estate, planted trees. He got exotic plants in from all over the place. Apparently, it's still there. Actually, there's an evergreen oak tree, and it's on the avenue exiting from the stables. And I'd never seen it. I didn't know what an evergreen oak tree was, but good old Google told me. Yes. Then there was a Dennis Richard O'Callaghan. Apparently, he was a horse breeder. He had horses there, and when he moved out. I think it was something to do with the Civil War here, and he moved out, and then Harry Usher took over, and he trained a lot of winners there. He won the Galway Plate several times, so he would have been a big trainer. Probably I won't say as good as Willie Mullins back in the day or Gordon Elliott, but they were. Racing was a different game then. There wasn't as many at it, and it was inexpensive to keep horses and feed them and this type of stuff. So you didn't keep no hope horses. And apparently there was a Jack and a Mary McGrath. They had lived beside where Rose Cottage is now. There was 3 little cottages there. Rose Cottage was only added on, I think, in the late 1990s or something like that. But there were 3. And then when he became the yard manager for Harry Usher, they moved him into the stable house, the house in the stable yard. And that's where he was. But when Harry Usher passed away, which was, I think he trained there till about 1957 or something like that. So to lease out the yard, they needed the house. So Jack and Mary McGrath had to move again, and they were put in a little bungalow on the exit road from the stables. And you can still see the railings where they were, but the house is gone. And apparently at the back of that house was a tuck mill. Robert Molesworth had constructed a tuck mill to pump water from the river up to a cistern house, which was right beside the stables. And I mean, the technology that they'd used to pump water, this was just to water the plants that he had, it was, I suppose that's what they did, they, I mean, I have a feeling that also down near where the mill was, they had an ice house. Now, most people around here call it a brick arch, but I have seen photographs of an ice house, and this is so like what ice houses were built. Okay, so probably at the most we ever had working in the yard was probably six people to ride out. So we'd have a string of 6 horses, and we'd tack them up. We probably had around 20 or so horses in the yard. There was a front yard and a backyard, and I think that was in the days of Harry Usher. It was, if you had so many, we didn't have that many, you'd need a front and a backyard. But in the days when every stable was full, if a horse started coughing, you'd need to isolate him. So what they did was they could move it to an area where the other horses didn't come into contact with it, so you'd quarantine them, more or less. But anyway, we'd have the six horses, and off we'd go. And right beside the stable yard was a 1 mile round field, which was a gallop. And so, depending on how close to a race they were coming, you wouldn't gallop them every day, but you'd bring them out for exercise. So, just say it wasn't a gallop day, we'd go off into the woods, popping over fallen branches and everything, and you'd hear the horses squealing and this type of thing. I have to say, I've never seen horses enjoy themselves as much as when they were in the woods, because they wouldn't have been used to that. They'd be used to big open plains. If you bought a horse from the Curragh, all they could see was just open space. Whereas in Brackenstown, and there was loads of trails you could go on. Sometimes you'd have to duck your head getting under branches or trees, but that was part of the fun. Teresa Tracy, she lives down in Seafield now, and there's a John Tracy. He works for the Fingal County Council. They were born in a house near the lake, right down beside the lake. The Tracys would have worked in the stables for Harry Usher, and so obviously when Harry Usher died, somebody moves in, and I think Dr. Cross bought the estate in '62. So that was probably 3 or 4 years after Harry Usher died that Dr. Cross bought it. And before David Blandford trained there was a trainer called Ted Curtin. He trained there, and he moved out to go to the Curragh to train his horses because he was getting a lot of good flat horses, which, you know, wouldn't necessarily be over kind of, you know, they wouldn't, going through woods wouldn't do much for a flat horse. Whereas the steeplechase horses, they would really have enjoyed that type of thing. So, but the strange thing was when I see it nowadays is there was a back entrance to the stables or to the estate, and there was the main entrance where the gates are. Yeah, but the back entrance we could sometimes, if the horses had raced within the last couple of days, we could just walk them around the roads. So we'd go down the hill from the stables, out onto the Brackenstown road, walk up to Knocksheddan Bridge, and back up through the main, come back in the main gates, and you mightn't see a car. At the most, you'd see one or two cars, and, you know, you'd be waving them down to slow them down. But now it's just non-stop traffic. You know, it's just. Oh yes, Dr. Cross, as I say, he was the assistant master to the rotunda, and whenever we had a vet there testing to see any mares that were there, were they in fault, he'd come along and he'd say some of those instruments wouldn't be big enough for some of my patients. But I jest. But that's Dr. Cross was he was a lovely man. He kind of, his wife had predeceased him. I think she had died in 1960. Dr. Cross. Yeah. Well, he was, as I say, he was a very learned man, and apparently in those circles that he would have travelled in, you know, mingled with, he was a very good raconteur. He told wonderful stories, and some of them had to be censored. You know, that would what I just said there a few minutes ago would be one of his things that he'd say, you know. And as I say, his two daughters both rode out in the yard, and they loved riding the horses. They'd had ponies, but they had never been on a horse that had the speed. And when they got onto the gallops, you could the joy on their faces when you'd pull up after a good gallop. But you know, it's strange. Race horses, I suppose it's like preparing a horse. You would never go flat out all the time. It was just all the time. It was building up muscle strength, stamina, and you wouldn't work them all the time. It was kind of, and you know, sometimes you'd be sitting against a hold, trying to hold one back from going too fast. So, but. So the elder of the two girls that rode out, one day she was on a horse that took a bit of a hold, and she went flying off through the trees. Her helmet was knocked off by a branch, but she still did. She kept coming back for more. She loved it. Yeah. Diane was her name. Another chap in the yard, his name is Tony Gallagher. He recently died too, within the last couple of years. But he had a Honda 50. So if we were going to go down to the village in Swords, we'd go by Brackenstown House itself. Instead of going down the back road, we'd go down past Brackenstown House, and there was another laneway down there that brought you to the mill direct. And we could go up the road up by the mill house and come out where Rose Cottage is now. And of course that was the Brackenstown Road where Rose Cottage is. You know, they've since put a couple of roundabouts in, and so, well, to be honest with you, we didn't really, because there were students there during our part of the day. There'd be nobody there. So as well as that, it was private. It was their private place, so you didn't go staring into you know, their private property. And it was the same with Jack and Mary McGrath. They had a lovely little cottage down the road from the stables. But you know, we'd see them and they'd wave to us as we rode by on the horses. But we didn't intrude on them. You know, they did have a granddaughter who lived in England. Mary Fryer, I think, was her name, and she used to come over for the holidays. And she used to come up. And Liam Malloy, he would get her riding on the horses and everything. You know. during the lunchtime or something like that. Just and she, anyone that came up there loved the atmosphere up there. It was. If you came from the Knoll Road and you got to the main entrance, there was a gate lodge just at the main entrance, and there was a woman there called Kathleen Brown, and she was a niece of Harry Usher's, and she was apparently, whenever she got the gate lodge, she was given a tenancy for life. So although she outlived Harry Usher, she outlived Dr. Cross, everyone who bought the estate had to, and I think even Patrick Campbell, who now owns the estate, he actually paid for Kathleen Brown's burial, and she's buried out in Rollerstown graveyard. But so that was the first thing you met with in the main gates of Brackenstown. Was the gate lodge on the left, and something that seems to have been very badly overlooked is there's a graveyard to the right, just across from where the gate lodge was. And I remember being in it several times, and there was 5 or 6 gravestones there. And it was Richard Manders, who was the sheriff of Dublin at one stage. That was his own private burial ground. In the Mansion House in Dublin, there's a portrait of him in the Oak Room, apparently. Right. Richard Manders, he was the sheriff of Dublin, and I think he operated a toll bridge on Knocksheddan Bridge back in the day. But all of this I found out after I'd left Brackenstown. I didn't know any of this at the time. It was just... So if you come up the Brackenstown Road, and there's a couple of small roundabouts, and at the second small roundabout, if you turn left at it, it's kind of just bringing you back in the direction of Swords, and there's a gate there with a few bars missing from the gate, and you gain access down to the lake through there. So I think it's a public right of way, because no one's ever tried to prevent people from going down there or visiting the lake, because it's a beautiful spot. I walk the dog there every day, but for the last few weeks, probably since November, they've been pruning the cherry laurel trees that are around the lake and the avenues. It is an invasive species, and it's killing all the native. So it needed to be tackled, but they've left it in a terrible state. It's just mud everywhere. Oh, right, yeah. So it's not, if you're bringing a dog and he's splashing his belly, it's kind of like it. Yeah. You'd have to have him dry cleaned every time you go for a walk. The wildlife there are a couple of buzzards, and you can hear them. You wouldn't see them first. You just hear the little squeak they have, and immediately I have an app on my phone now. It's called Merlin, and you can just turn on Merlin and identify that bird, and it'll come up. It listens, and then suddenly, here we go. That's a buzzard. And then there's what you don't really realise is that there are background birds as well. And they call them Eurasian robins and Eurasian wrens and this type of stuff. But there's in the early days, in the mill house, there were students staying there. I think they went to Trinity, because the trainer that I work for, David Blanford, he hitched up with one of them, and he had a romance with her for about probably 5 years or something like that. So there was, as I say, the students, we didn't really see them because they would be gone in the morning. Yeah. Most people you'd meet up in Knocksheddan or Brackenstown, the lakes, would be dog walkers, because of the in the park in further down near where the Jacko was, you have to have a dog on the lead. And as I say, it's a wonderful area. There's squirrels there. My fella, he doesn't want to catch anything. He just wants to sniff them, you know. But they don't play ball with him, so but he just loves it there. I just opened the car door, out he pops, and we go off. I follow the dog. What I can tell you, and this my wife will swear by this, and it's we were sitting in the house in the stable yard, and David Blanford, the trainer, he had an Alsatian dog, and this dog, once he knew you, he was grand, but he was a great watchdog. So myself, and she wasn't my wife at the time, she was just my girlfriend, and we were sitting there watching the telly, and Vasco was at our feet, that was the dog, and the next thing we could hear footsteps coming from the back end of the house up towards the door which would lead out to the front door. And the dog got up and hid behind us. And I'm saying, oh my God. So Rita said to me, see what that is? Someone's out there. So I nervously opened the door into the corridor where the footsteps had come from. Not a sinner. I opened the front door, I went down to the back door, nobody. And the dog was still cowering but that was probably around 1970, that was. And just recently, within the last 6 months, I brought Rita up to show her the house and the state it's in. And we were looking in through the window of the house into the room where we had been watching the television. And the next thing, it was a windy-ish day. And the next thing, there was galvanised sheeting behind us went, oh my God, she says, let's get out of here. And that is a true story. She would tell you that the dog was afraid of whatever the sound was. Never knew what it was, but it was the hair would stand on the back of your neck anyway. But it didn't bother, kind of after it was gone, you say,